did a short intro to Exodus, and all of you were here, right? So I won't get into that so much today, but 350 to 400 years have passed since the book of Genesis. Well, we're actually going to get a little ending of the book of Genesis here. So you'll remember that the first word in Exodus is actually "and," right? Va in the or now, and the whole point is that it's a continued story. So chapter 1 is not that long, and it's really split into 3 sections: people, prosperity, and problems. So first it's going to be people, and then the prosperity of the Jews, of the Israelites, and then problems for the Israelites. So let's start with chapter 1, verse 1 of the book of Exodus. These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob. So we have kind of a continuation of Genesis here. Each with his household: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher. All the descendants of Jacob were 70 persons. Joseph was already in Egypt. Do you ever wonder why God had to send the Israelites to Egypt to begin with? I mean, why not just provide for them in Israel? You ever think about that? I think there was 2 reasons, and it had to do with God's sovereignty. I think the 2 reasons he sent them to Egypt to spend 400 plus years there was, first, to prepare them for the promised land. You'll remember that he told Abraham, God told Abraham that his offspring will be fruitful and multiply, and so in Egypt they're in a place where they're protected, right? They're protected from enemies. The Israelites are. They're in a fruitful land, and they multiply there, and they're well fed. It's nice atmosphere. So you can kind of think of Egypt as like an incubator for the Israelite people as they're preparing to prepare them and have them grow as a nation to go from 70 to a lot larger and a safe place. So that's the first reason, to prepare them for the promised land. The second reason would be to prepare the promised land for them. Okay? And where do I get that? And we looked at this in Genesis. You don't have to turn unless you want to, but Genesis 15, we get to see what God's dealing with the promised land while Israel is out of there. Genesis 15, starting with verse 13, it says this: Then the Lord said to Abram, "Know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs." What land is that? Egypt, right? "And will be servants there. And they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they will serve." So he will judge Egypt. "And afterward, they shall come out with great possessions." And that's going to happen. Israel, whenever they leave, is going to have all the gold of the land of Egypt. So God's going to fulfill that. In verse 15, "As for you, you shall go to your father in peace. You shall be buried at a good old age." Okay, here's what God's doing in the land of Canaan while Israel's gone. "And they shall come back here," back to the promised land, "in the 4th generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete." So what's that talking about? God is preparing the land of Israel, preparing the promised land for the Israelites to come back. And he says the reason why is because the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. So right now, while this whole time with Joseph is going on, there's 400 years, there's these people called the Amorites who are dwelling in the land of Canaan. And these people are very evil. Okay, and they are going to get worse and more evil. But God is going to be patient with them and call them to repentance before he judges them. Gives them 400 years of patience. And but their iniquity wasn't complete yet. So God's waiting for the Amorites' iniquity to be complete so that he can use the Israelites to judge them, to come in and to conquer them. Nobody can say, that God wasn't being fair to them. He was very patient with them, and he gave them 400 years to repent of their evil. So verse 6, then Joseph died, and all his brothers and all the generations, but the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. So there's the prosperity. So we had people, and then now we're in prosperity. God promised to Abraham, I will make you a great nation. And you'll remember he brings him outside and points to the sky at night and says, see all those stars? I will make your people as numerous as the stars. And so by bringing them to Egypt, he grew them from 75 people to possibly, some say it was up to 3 million, between 2 and 3 million people. So he's made them a great nation, and he's going to make them an even greater nation. So now we're going to get into the problem. So we had the prosperity, so now the problem's going to start. Now there arose, verse 8, now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. Basically, what's going to happen here is the Egyptians are going to forget their history. They're going to 350, 400 years have passed, and the Egyptians have forgotten about this man Joseph, who saved all of Egypt from a famine, right? And was this great prophet. And they're going to forget all about that, and they're going to start to see these Hebrews who are living with them as enemies. And isn't that what we have in our nation today? We have a whole generation who is forgetting our history as a nation, right? We have in our Pledge of Allegiance, one nation under God. Do you know what the first act of Congress was with our new nation? The printing of a Bible. That was the first act of Congress. And so this whole concept of separation of church and state, you know that's not in the Constitution. The term separation of church and state came from Thomas Jefferson. He wrote a letter to Annbury Baptist Church, this group, and his whole point in that, in separating, he said there's a thin veil between church and state, a thin veil of separation between church and state. And what he was talking about in that is that it's the government should not get involved in the church, not that the church shouldn't be involved in the government.
Like
and so
everyone really thinks it is. It's like, no, it's the other way
yeah,
around.
exactly.
The church is trying to get into the...
So in the Constitution, it does say that that the Congress shall make no law prohibiting the free exercise, the establishment of religion or the free exercise thereof. So we're not supposed to have a state church, and they can't prohibit free exercise of religion. So we've forgotten. We have a whole generation who's forgetting our Christian heritage as a nation, and that's what's happening here in Egypt. They're forgetting their heritage, and because of that, they're going to do something dumb, right? So let's see what happens. Verse 9. And he said to his people, behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. So the Pharaoh is going to solve the Jewish problem. Does that sound familiar? You'll remember the same thing happened in World War II with Adolf Hitler. And Adolf Hitler saw that the Jews were becoming numerous and prosperous in Germany. They were very wealthy, generally speaking. They were shrewd businessmen. And Hitler started what he called the final solution, quote unquote. The final solution to the Jewish problem was to kill 6 million of them and to wipe them out from the land of Europe. And that was what he thought would be the final solution. So Pharaoh is going to do his own way of taking care of this Jewish problem. I do want to point, though, that this is what's happening here in Pharaoh's heart is God stirring Pharaoh's heart. Okay, what Why? Because God needs to get Israel, his people, back to the promised land. And so if they were to stay all comfortable in Egypt and everything's hunky-dory peaceful, they would never leave Egypt. So God is stirring his heart. There's in Romans 9:17, you don't have to turn there, but I'll turn there. It says, for the scripture says to Pharaoh, for this very reason I have raised you up, that I might show my power in you, and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. So don't be like stressed. It's so easy to get stressed when we see politicians make actions that we maybe don't like or do like, whatever it is. But just remember, don't get all stressed about it. Because we have to remember that that we should pray for them, right? The Bible says pray for those who are in governing authority. But don't be stressed about them, because know that all those who are in governing authority are pawns in the hand of our sovereign God. And so they, Daniel chapter 4, it says this, the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever he wishes. We have to remember that, and not let our hearts be troubled by what happens in the political world. Governments and leaders come and go. They all through history, they come and go. And these great empires who once ruled, like Rome and the Greeks and Alexander the Great, and all these things have come and go, and soon they are forgotten, and new people rise up. Right. So this is all God works all that for his purposes. So verse 11. Therefore, here's his plan. They set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. They built for Pharaoh store cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel. Isn't it interesting? The more they persecute them, the more they enslave them, the more prosperous, and the more that they multiply. It's like we can't win with these people, right? And even the Romans 8:28 applies here too, right? For the Lord makes all things work together for the good of those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. So God is overturning the evil plans of Egypt, and he's overturning their intentions and turning it into his intentions. Isn't that cool how our God does that? And I couldn't help when I read that verse to think about Christian persecution. Irenaeus was famous for saying the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. The more you try to kill the church, the more that you try to execute. In church history, if you look at church history, the times with the greatest slaughter of the church, Nero and some of these emperors, was a time when the church spread ridiculously fast. Persecution helps the church grow. And why? Because, well, it separates the wheat and the chaff. You start to see who really quickly, when things get really hard, you see the real church, those who actually are followers of Jesus Christ, get emboldened in their faith and shine, right? And those who aren't, well, they run away and compromise. So it purifies the church. It's sort of like, and it causes it sort of like a supernova. It closes in on itself and just blows up. And that's what happens with persecution. That's happening here with the Israelites. Verse 13. So they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves, and made their lives bitter with hard service, in mortar and brick, and in all kinds of work in the field. In all their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves. Then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, okay, here's his new plan. His next plan is population control, okay? So the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shipra and the other Pua. How about that for a kid's name? Pua. What do you think? No. So anyway, okay, so let's read verse 16. When you serve as a midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool. If it is a son, you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, she shall live. So Shiphrah and Puah were probably supervisors of midwives. That's why he's talking to these particular two. And he gives this order, this brutal order. And you know what? God never forgets this. Because you'll remember, what's the 10th plague that will come? What's the 10th plague? The firstborn. God will avenge this. And so he gives this brutal order to Shiphrah and to Puah and tells them to tell all the Hebrew midwives to kill every boy while he was on the birth stool. Basically, as soon as he comes out, if it's a boy, kill him. If it's a girl, they can live. Verse 17, but the midwives feared God. Ooh, isn't that a powerful phrase? But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded, but let the male children live. So they had to come up with, they came to a point. Do we obey Pharaoh or do we obey God? That's their decision point, right? Do we value the sanctity of human life? You have to remember, just because it's allowed by a government or even commanded by the government, it doesn't make it right, does it? So this is an act of civil disobedience. Disobeying the government because you have a higher allegiance to God. It says in Romans 13 that we are to obey the governing authorities, right? Why? Because they are appointed to us by God. God has placed them over us, and we are to obey them. And we find the realm of human government in Romans 13. Their job is to punish evil and to reward good. That's the rule of the governing. So that's why Paul says they bear the sword to punish evil and to reward good. But in Acts 5:29, Paul and I think it's Barnabas, they are being told, stop preaching. You have to stop preaching. And then so the authorities let them go. And what do? They keep preaching. And they pull them in and say, didn't we tell you to stop teaching in this name? And they said, we must obey God rather than man. That's the higher calling. We always must obey God rather than man. That's what these ladies are rightfully doing. They're placing the sanctity of human life above the order of the government. Verse 18. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, why have you done this? And let the male children live. The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them. What they're saying is, well, we wanted to do it, but these Hebrew women have the baby too fast.
It's already there.
Yeah, and of course, that could be true in some cases, but they aren't being entirely truthful here, are they? It's like not like every single. You can't make the argument that every single one of them was having babies too fast, where the midwives couldn't even get there. So we'll come back to that. We'll finish this chapter first. So God dealt with the midwives. I'm sorry. So God dealt well with the midwives. He's blessing them for their obedience to him. And the people multiplied and grew very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. So he blesses them. But Pharaoh is going to react to this. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, every son that is born to the Hebrew, you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live. So why is this happening? Well, Satan knew at this time that if he eliminates Israel, he eliminates the Messiah. So he has a bloodthirst, and it's not going to end here. We're going to see it all through the Old Testament, a bloodthirst that Satan has for the Jews. Because if he can stop them, that he can stop the Messianic line, then he can keep Jesus from coming and dying and having final victory. See that? You see why this is so important to Satan? So Pharaoh makes all of the Egyptians basically sheriffs He basically tells all the Egyptians, if you see a male Hebrew, throw him into the Nile. Isn't this just brutal? It is. It's completely brutal because the midwives weren't doing it. So he's just stepping it up a level. Okay. So this course with these midwives, this course brings up the question, is it okay to lie to save a life? Have any of you read this or seen the story, The Hiding Place of Corrie ten Boom? You know that story? Corrie ten Boom? No? You didn't? And yeah, so Corrie ten Boom hid Jews in her attic. The book's called The Hiding Place, from the Nazis, and would frequently lie to the Nazis when they would come to her house, right? And so the question is that all right? Of course, the Bible calls lying a sin, and of course, it never commends lying. But what do you do in these kind of situations? Is there a higher good involved? My personal opinion is yes. And here's why I say that. I don't think any of us would have a prop if someone were to come. Let's say I'm not carrying a gun, but let's say I was, and somebody came bursting in here and was about to shoot you all. If I had a gun, I would shoot him dead. Right? I would shoot him dead because I'm saving your lives by taking his life. So if that's okay, I don't think anybody would argue that's not okay. If that's okay, then isn't lying to save a life? That's my personal opinion. This is like one of those ethics areas the Bible doesn't directly address. But to me, if I was in Nazi Germany and I was hiding Jews and the Nazis showed up and said, "Are you hiding Jews?" I'd say nope, because it's a higher good. Yeah, and Frank, same thing. Yeah. So to me, that's my personal opinion. Take it or leave it. The Bible doesn't talk about that ethical dilemma. That's the word I was looking for.
It's the same thing as far as working on Sunday, doing something on Sunday. If somebody's going to die, you're going to say, "I'm sorry, but I'm not doing that. I won't be into the hospital until tomorrow."
Yeah.
Hold it and try it again tomorrow. We'll
So chapter 2. This chapter 2 covers 80 years. One chapter covers 80 years of Moses' life. Isn't that crazy? And we're not going to cover the whole chapter today, but it covers his 40 years in Egypt and then his 40 years as a shepherd before he comes back to Egypt. So this covers a long time. And D.L. Moody, who was in Chicago 100 years ago, a pastor, he said, for the first 40 years, Moses was trying to be something. For the next 40 years, God showed Moses that he was nothing. For the final 40 years, God showed Moses that he could take a nothing and make a something out of him. And so that's a good summary of Moses' life. So it's interesting that Moses didn't start his ministry till he was 80 years old. Isn't that amazing? To me, some of you who are a little bit more seasoned in your years than I am, which is all of you, that's all of you, God wants to use you in great ways. Moses wasn't till he was 80 years old, and God can and wants to use you in just as powerful ways as if you're 20 years old. And the story of Moses is a powerful example of that, I think. So, chapter 2, verse 1. Now a man from the house of Levi, so remember that Moses and Aaron came from the Levitical side, so that's why Aaron becomes the high priest. So now a man from the house of Levi went and took as his wife a Levite woman. That's Moses' parents. Moses is going to share with us their names in chapter 6, but let's wait for that. The woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was a fine child, and Moses wrote this, isn't it interesting? Yours might say a beautiful child. Some of the texts say that. Isn't that funny that Moses is calling himself a beautiful child? She hid him for 3 months. So Moses' parents had 3 kids. They had Miriam, and then Aaron, and then Moses. And so this is talking about whenever Moses was born. So you may ask, why did Aaron get to live when the boys are supposed to be killed? Well, the answer for that is that Aaron was probably born before the order went out to kill all the males. So he beat that. So now Moses is being born, and that order came out. So we're in verse 3. When she could hide him no longer. I don't know how you could hide a baby for 3 months. I am clueless on that. When there's crying and stuff like that, but somehow she distracted. He didn't cry that loud yet, whatever the reason. But when she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and daubed it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the riverbank. So in Hebrews 11:23, it says about his parents, by faith they hid him and did not fear the king's edict. So they're making a step of faith, first of all, by hiding him, right? Because that's a big step of faith and very risky. And they're also making a step of faith by releasing him. I'm not a parent, but are you all parents? Okay. So I can't imagine releasing my baby and letting them go into fate. You know what I mean? But that was their only chance, his only chance of life at this point. So it was a step of faith to trust him into God's hands. They probably prayed and let him go. And that would have been a really hard thing to do. So verse 4, and his sister, so that's Miriam, stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. Now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river. It's probably a ritual bathing. There was two gods of the Nile River, kind of. One was Happy. Sounds like it's Hapi. Maybe it's pronounced Hoppy. I don't know. Happy, and he was the god of the Nile. And Osiris was the god of the Nile flood and the vegetation increase that happened because of that. So this is probably a ritual bathing. So it says, while her young women walked beside the river is when she ran into Moses' basket. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant woman, and she took it. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. And she took pity on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. J. Vernon McGee said about this text, he said, God right here brings two things together that he made. A baby's cry and a woman's heart. Right? So this baby opens the thing and baby cries and it melts Pharaoh's daughter's heart, even though she knows it's a Hebrew and she knows she should throw him into the Nile River to kill him. It says in the text that she took pity on him. So verse 17, verse 7, not 17. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, okay, so Josephus is a Jewish historian. A lot of you may have heard of him. And he talks about this story and says that he wasn't alive then, but what the tradition passed down to the Jews was that Pharaoh's daughter took Moses, started passing him down to her maidservants, and they kept passing the baby because none of them could nurse. And then Miriam at that point comes out of the reeds basically and intercedes and says, I have an idea. And that's what happens here. And they have no idea that this is his sister. So verse 7 again. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you? And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go. So the girl went and called the child's mother. Just imagine Moses' mom when she hears that her baby's okay. Not only has he been found by Pharaoh's daughter, but she's asking for a Hebrew to be a nursemaid for her own son. Isn't that kind of cool? So, but it gets even better. Verse 8, and Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child and nurse her for me. Nurse your own baby, and I will give you your wages. She's going to get paid to nurse her own baby. Is this cool how God's working all of this? This is like divine providence, like working in a very clear way. It must not have seemed that way to Moses' mom when she lost hope and had to let him go, right? But God's providence is working in all this. So the woman took the child and nursed him. When the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses because she said, I drew him out of the water. So now Moses is a prince. Isn't that amazing? So this is the second time a Hebrew has risen in the royalty in Egypt. And both times like in miraculous ways, right? It's pretty cool to think about that. And this is really God's working of providence. He's weaving together natural occurrences for a supernatural purpose, and nothing can stop his works of providence. Hudson Taylor, who a lot of you guys know, I think you know, he was a missionary, a British missionary to China, and he had a hard time over there. It was a very discouraging ministry for him, and he went over there and he came to a city called Hangzhou, and he, with a bag of books on his back, he went through this town of Hangzhou, sharing on an evangelistic sort of tour. And he's going around anyways. He got exhausted through the day, and he went to a little tea house in the suburb of Mangzhou. And he's sitting in this tea house, puts his books in front of him on his bag, and just to sit and relax, exhausted. He's on his way to his boat, exhausted, and decides to spend his day and spend a little bit of time in this tea house. Well, he's sitting there in the tea house, and he shared how he saw an elderly Chinese man kind of going like this, peering at him and looking at him strangely, and not knowing why he was looking at him weird. But eventually this elderly guy comes up to Hudson Taylor, and the conversation goes like this, according to Hudson Taylor. The Chinese guy said, "Are you a foreigner?" Hudson Taylor says, "Yes, I am an Englishman." "Are those books in that bag on your table?" And Hudson Taylor says, "Well, yes, they are." And then the Chinese guy says, "Are you a teacher of a foreign religion?" "Yes, of the Jesus religion." And this guy went on to tell Hudson Taylor that he had spent years earnestly speaking truth, and that he hadn't found a religion that gave him peace to his guilty conscience. But he shared that the day before, a man dressed in white appeared to him, glowing, and told him to go to Mangzhou, this town, and go to the inn, and there you will see a foreigner with a bag of books sitting on a table in front of him. And so this man went and saw this foreigner at a table with a bag of books in front of him. And Hudson Taylor ended up sharing the gospel with this man. And this man went home, destroyed all of his Buddhist idols and all those kind of things like that, and became a fervent follower of Jesus Christ. That is a miraculous story of providence, isn't it? Providence doesn't always work that way. There's another man, William Cowper, who actually was an English contemporary of John Wesley, and alive during the same time. And Cowper was in a crisis in his life of a crisis in his life that caused a lot of depression and hardship. And he got so depressed that he decided to try that he was going to kill himself. He was going to finish his life. So first he tried to kill himself with laudanum. How do you say that? Is that how you say it? Is it some drug? Laudanum? I don't know. He tried to kill himself with laudanum, whatever that is. It didn't work. So he then had a coach driver take him to the Thames River, where he intended to throw himself off a bridge into the Thames River. But he reported that when he shared his story, that he felt a strange force kept him from doing so. The next morning, he tried to stab himself. And as he went to stab himself, no joke, the blade broke and ricocheted and broke and didn't go into his body. This is all a true story. So he decided to try to hang himself. And as he was hanging, somebody came in the last second, cut the rope when he was unconscious, but he was spared. So he shares that in a moment of strange cheerfulness, which was foreign to him, he opened up his Bible and opened up to the book of Romans and studied the book of Romans. And he shares that He had strength to believe and rejoiced in the forgiving power of Christ. Well, this man, William Cowper, ended up becoming a great English poet and a hymn writer. And he wrote a hymn, which I don't think we sing, but it's called "God Moves in a Mysterious Way." And he says this: this is the hymn. God moves in a mysterious way, his wonders to perform. He plants his footsteps in the sea and rides upon the storm. Deep in unfathomable minds of never failing skill, he treasures up his bright designs and works his sovereign will. And that powerful? So this guy was a guy who experienced God's providence in his own life in a powerful way, and it just changed him. So we are going to leave off there for this week, and we'll pick up in chapter 2, verse 11 next week, when Moses runs into his problems and has to leave Egypt. So that's where we'll pick up next week. Does anybody have any questions or comments?